Hi, here we are back at Botany 101 all together, and this is of course general botany. If you recall, in our last lecture we talked about the flower being the sex organ of the plant, okay? And today we're going to continue with lecture, all right? And today's lesson, if we can go to the slides over here, okay, it has to do with fruits and seeds, okay? Plant life cycle, fruits and seeds. Our objectives for today include pollination and pollinators, okay? Remember that generally flowering plants make pollen, and remember that pollen is actually something called the male gametophyte. We're also going to cover double fertilization, so this is kind of like an interesting take. Plants have a little bit different sex lives than we do. We're also going to talk about fruits. Okay, fruits are essential to the process of sexual reproduction. Furthermore, how can you tell a fruit from a vegetable? Okay, what is a fruit? What is a vegetable? And how can you tell the difference? We're going to go into different kinds of fruit types, including fleshy fruits. We're going to get into dry fruits as well. And we're going to talk about apples and oranges, tropical and subtropical fruits, because these of course are germane to us and our experiences here in Hawaii. Yes, because I guess this is generally we can get fruits all year round. Yes, so we of course, being in Hawaii, we tend to mostly eat tropical and subtropical fruits when we get it from here. Okay, all right, so first of all we're going to talk about pollination and fertilization. Recall that the sex organ of a plant is a flower, right? And flowers produce pollen in the part of the flower called the stamen. And specifically, the pollen comes from the anther. So here's a picture, all different kinds of pollen. And did you know that pollen is such a interesting thing to study that they actually have a field of botany or subfield of botany known as palynology. Palynologists are people who just study pollen. And pollen is very important in terms of archaeology and anthropology because pollen, the exene, I think it's called, the outside of the pollen is very, very, very hard. So when people, drill into the soil or drill into rock and bring up, sedimentary rock and bring up the core, a lot of times they'll have pollen in there. And because pollen is so hard, it can fossilize. And what can happen is that people can identify the kind of plants that lived at a certain place at a certain time due to the fact that the pollen easily gets fossilized, okay? Anyway, so what happens in pollination? Generally, it's merely the transfer of pollen from a stamen to a pistil, okay? All right. Another thing too is we have two different kinds of pollination. We have self-pollination. Okay, self-pollination happens when the pollen from one flower pollinates its own stigma. Okay, so self-pollination is a possibility with plants because recall, they do have bisexual flowers sometimes. Okay. Another thing that we can have is cross-pollination. This is when you have pollen, okay, from one flower going onto the stigma of another flower on the same plant sometimes, even though some people can call that selfing too. Anyway, so cross-pollination was pollen from one plant going onto the stigma of another plant. That strictly is pollination, okay, cross-pollination. And what is actually entailed? Pollination needs an agent. It needs some kind of an agent to actually do the transfer of pollen from one flower to another in the case of cross-pollination. Okay, so a very big thing that has happened, over the millions and millions of years that flowering plants have evolved is that they have a lot of different kind of animal pollinator. Okay, animals are great ones for transferring pollen from one flower to another. Okay, and you can think, what the animal is actually doing is the animal is actually getting food. Okay, the animal is not pollinating the flower. Okay, what it's actually doing is actually getting food for itself. is actually getting a food reward, right? And some of the animals that do this include birds. This is actually a honey eater. Okay, you can see that very pretty bird. Okay, and it has a long curved bill, ideally suited for probably sucking up nectar from a flower like this. This looks like some kind of a protea to me, some kind of Australian or African kind of inflorescence. It looks like a protea or protea. But anyway, so of course in Hawaii we were very, very famous for our honey creepers. The honey creepers of Hawaii were very important in terms of pollinating native plants, okay, native flowering plants in Hawaii. Okay. Oh, let me go back to that. Birds pollinators tend to be attracted to flowers because birds actually see in the same spectrum that we humans do. So what's bright to us and what draws our eye, something like red, orange, yellow. So birds usually tend to pollinate fairly bright colored flowers. And oftentimes these flowers have nectar. Okay, they have nectar, right? And, you know, if we can kind of go to the Elmo here, okay, we have here, okay, we have a hibiscus. This is just a regular cultivated hibiscus. And this is, as you can see, it's a fairly large flower. It's bright red. So its antecedents, you know, the different kinds of forebears that this flower had were probably pollinated by birds. The bright flower color, okay, just that's a good clue. So this is actually a cultivated form, so that's not one that you necessarily see in nature, but the ancestors of this would probably have been pollinated, okay, by birds, right? This flower is large, it's sturdy, all right? It does, some of them have nectar, so the bird would actually be getting a food reward for doing it. So always remember that the birds aren't pollinated the flowers with the intent to pollinate. What they're trying to do is they're trying to get food. Because of course, birds have very high metabolisms. They're, you know, always jumping around and, you know, looking for food and things. So they actually need to bring in a lot of calories inside of their body or they'll starve to death. If you actually have a bird in a cage and if you just happen to forget to feed it for maybe 2 or 3 days, it will actually starve to death because its metabolism is so quick, it's so fast that it needs to have food all the time, okay? It's kind of like a sad thing that might happen, you know? We also have insects. Insects, of course, are also animals, okay? And did you know that there are actually more insects in terms of mass on this planet than all the other kind of animals combined in terms of their variety as well, okay? Okay, so here we have bee-pollinated flowers, okay? Oftentimes, like here's a composite. Remember composites that we talked about? Or members of the Asteraceae, the daisy family? Or the same family that the silver sword, the Haleakala silver sword is in. Well, here you can see that these are all individual flowers. Bees, what kind of flowers do they tend to pollinate? They tend to pollinate flowers that are yellowish, okay? Or they also tend to pollinate flowers, okay, that are blue in color. So here we have, let's see, here we have a flower of Chinese violet, also known as Acastacia gangetica. Now take a look at this, and do you notice anything else about this flower? It's a little hard to see. This is one petal here, okay? Well, you can see that it has 5 petals, yeah, 5 petals, so it's a dicot, right? And if you actually look at it too, you can only section it down this way in order to cut it in half. So this is a bilaterally symmetric flower, yeah, when you kind of look into it. You can see the stamens in there. Isn't that kind of neat? Yeah. Anyway, so Acastacia gangetica is a very common weed, but its blue color can tell us that generally it's pollinated by bees, okay? So generally blue-colored flowers, yellow-colored flowers, purple-colored flowers, you know, all in that spectrum because bees tend to see in the high energy side of the spectrum. And of course, remember low energy is red and high energy would be blue and violet. Yes, so those are the colors that bees can see. And did you know that a lot of bees can actually see in the ultraviolet as well? You can actually take a flower, I don't have one here, but you could take a flower that looks just like a regular flower, you know, and then you look at it under ultraviolet light and you'll see patterns, striations on it, or dots, a pattern of dots, usually in a line, you know, leading toward the middle of the flower. Those are sort of like You know the fellow on the landing strip over at the airport, right? So he's over there doing this kind of stuff. What it's telling the bee, who can see this, even if the patterns you cannot see under regular ambient light, but if you can see it under ultraviolet light, the bees sometimes can see under that kind of light. So what do they do? It's like, here it is, this is where the food is. It's kind of signaling to the bee to where to go in order to get the pollen or the nectar. Okay, isn't that interesting? Okay, now we also have butterflies. Okay, butterflies tend to also pollinate kind of bright colored flowers. Okay, so on this Elmo here, now we have this bright colored firecracker plant. Okay, so this is actually the flowers of the firecracker plant, and they're bright red, they're tubular, they probably have some kind of nectar. Okay. Now another interesting notation is that, so these are tubular. These are relatively small, so very likely in its native habitat, it would probably be pollinated by butterflies. Something like this, either this plant or something like it, okay? So butterflies tend to like bright colors, and including even things like purple and all that kind of stuff. But the main thing for butterflies is it should have nectar, because what they have, there's this long proboscis, right? A long proboscis with sort of like a feeding tube, and they'll put it into the flower and suck up all the juice, all the sugar water, because that's what nectar is, right? Anybody ever did this with a honeysuckle? When you're a little kid, there's a Japanese honeysuckle that's pretty much prevalent in places on Oahu, which gets kind of a lot of rain. So what do? You actually get the flower, you bite off the back part of it, and you suck it, and it's sugar water, and that's what these insects are getting. It's like their food reward, Okay. Now next, another kind of feeder with a long proboscis are moths. Okay, moths actually do tend to pollinate flowers too. Okay, moth-pollinated flowers include, if you can look under the Elmo, we have jasmine. So what is a characteristic, thinking of flowers that are like this, that are like jasmine? Jasmine, pikake, pakalana. Okay, what else? Tuberose, stephanotis. They're white flowers, or very light in color, and they smell very sweet. They're very, very fragrant, especially at night. Why is that? Think about it. Because moths are active at night, right? And they're bright and light in color. Okay, they're light in color because the moths don't see very well at night, just like any other animal. But then if you have something white, yeah? Have you ever looked at this like under a new moon or under an old moon, and you can't see, but then if you see something light, you can kind of make it out. So these flowers are actually the way they are because they have to do their job. Their structure, what they look like, their shape, all has to do with their function. Their function of the flower is to get pollinated, to attract a pollinator. Remember, that's one of the features of a petal. The petal helps attract a pollinator. So in the case of jasmine, pikake, all those really beautiful, sweet-smelling flowers, white ginger, what they do is that they actually make the smell, they actually make the sugar water or the nectar in order to lure a pollinator, to affect pollination. So pretty much what the flower is doing is actually bending these animals to do their will. Isn't that something? Okay? All right. Now we also have other kind of pollinators called flies. All right? Remember that Rafflesia that we saw before? Okay, so if we can go to the Elmo, we have here, okay, this is, oh, there's an ant running around over there too. That's all right, live and let live. Here you have a Stapelia. It's a kind of small flower. You can see my finger there, yeah? So this very small Stapelia, I think it is a Stapelia. I myself like dry, arid type plants, the, what do you call that? Xeriscaping type. Anyway, so this one happened to be flowering, and I haven't been able to smell a bad smell from it, but you can see, toward the center of the flower, it's like a purplish, dull red color. Okay, that is one characteristic of a flower that is pollinated by flies, right? Because flies, so here you can also see, this is also a good example of a plant that has photosynthetic stems, right? Another good thing about it too is that, it's a plant adapted to very dry conditions. So this flowered, I don't think I watered this plant for over 2 weeks. I watered it yesterday because I was like, oh my gosh, but I hadn't realized that I hadn't watered it in such a long time. Because sometimes one of the things people might notice, and people who grow plants will often notice this, okay? Especially if you grow them professionally, what they'll often do, like in orchid nurseries or other kind of people growing plants that are that throw a lot of flowers, what they'll do is they'll starve the plant. They'll actually withhold water or withhold food from it. And sometimes, you know, even when you're doing things like a lychee tree or a mango tree, you want it to give, you know, fruit or flowers, because you can't have the fruit unless you have the flowers. So what people will do, they'll get a knife and they'll cut the tree, or they'll threaten it in some way. They'll pound a nail into the tree. What that does is it shocks the tree or it shocks the plant. And the plant doesn't think, of course, but it's like, I'm dying, I better reproduce right now, you know? So then what it'll do, it'll throw flowers, a whole lot of flowers. Isn't that amazing? Yeah, so plants, if you actually starve them or you withhold water, one of the things they'll do is they'll throw out all these flowers because it thinks that it's dying. Of course, plants don't think, but still, you know, that's sort of like the reason for that, okay? So remember one thing about the Stapelia, and remember about that Rafflesia, that large flower, 3 feet big, right? So it's a color of dull meat, and so fly-pollinated flowers tend to have what we consider unpleasant smells. It's pleasant, I guess, to the flies, but it's not pleasant to us. They have a tendency to smell like fecal matter or rotting meat or dead fish. You know, for us, it's like really repulsive, but for flies, they're in heaven, you know? Okay. Let's see, so for animals, remember that it is a food reward that is involved in terms of what they're doing. Remember that the different kinds of animals, okay, they're not actually pollinating the flower to pollinate it, they're actually trying to get food. That's what they're trying to do, okay? And this is a good, so they want to get nectar and or pollen, just like this little bee running around on that little head of a daisy, you know? And so the thing too is that over millennia, millions of years, even more, hundreds of millions of years, plants and animals have evolved together. They've actually changed from one form to another, and what they do is that they have co-evolved. You have bees, you know, going to certain flowers, the flower adapting, you know, to get the bee to pollinate them. So this, you know, the relationships between animals and plants is extremely intimate. We know that we can't live without plants, but also that plants cannot live without animals either, especially their pollinators, okay? So what happens is that the plant actually uses the animal to affect its means. It wants to get pollinated. Okay, that's what it wants to do. And the animals affect that. And in exchange, the plant uses up enough energy to make pollen, to make nectar, to make itself attractive to the animal, okay, in order to get the animal to come and do the business that it wants it to do. Okay, interesting how it works. Now we also have another kind of pollinator, and this is an abiotic or non-living pollinator. And that, of course, is wind, especially grasses. Remember that we looked at grass flowers last time? Well, here, this is actually a finger grass. It's a very common weed. You know, most people consider it a weed. Chloris is a genus of, they call them finger grass. And one of the things you can see of a quality of a wind-pollinated flowers is that they have all these, look at all these little flowers with all these anthers sticking out. They usually have lots of anthers. They produce copious amounts of pollen, lots and lots and lots of pollen, okay? So remember that last time we talked about this fact that during summer is often the time people get their allergies. It's because the grass flowers and other flowers are giving off bunches of pollen. Did you know too, I've seen a picture, you know, of when pine trees and other conifers, okay, are actually producing pollen. I've seen a photograph of like a doorway someplace, you know, near the Pacific Midwest with like snow drifts, like, you know, it's maybe this high, all pollen. It's amazing. So if the plant wants to do wind pollination, they have to actually produce lots and lots of pollen. The more pollen they produce, more chance of it that the pollen will hit the right, you know, stigma. Okay, and just like if a plant doesn't make that much pollen, it's much more able to conserve its energy to make itself attractive, to make itself smell nice, you know, to make itself look nice to whatever pollinator trying to lure, you know, into its, you know, nefarious intent. Okay, now here, this is another kind of grass, and here you can see that the stigmas are sticking out. Now, so one of the characteristics of a wind-pollinated flower is that they tend to make lots of pollen. Another characteristic of a wind-pollinated flower is they have a feathery stigma. The stigma is not so much sticky as feathery, and that's to catch as much pollen as it can, okay? Another thing you'll notice about these grass flowers is, remember that these are incomplete flowers because they pretty much have only pistil and stamen, All right, they don't have petals, and of course they don't need petals because they don't need to attract a pollinator. Yeah. Another thing is that you can see that the flowers are greenish. They're kind of inconspicuous. They're really small. It's because they don't need to attract a pollinator. They don't need to be red or purple or blue. They don't have to waste any energy with any of those kind of highfalutin colors just because they don't need to attract an animal to itself. Okay, isn't that neat? Right? Now, the thing about pollination and fertilization, one of the things we have to remember is that pollination is one event, fertilization is another event. They don't go together. They do kind of go together, but they're not synonymous with each other. Okay? Another thing to remember is that flowering plants undergo something that we call double fertilization. Okay? Double fertilization. What happens during double fertilization? So you have pollination, one event. Okay, then if the right pollen lands on the right plant, then you'll have fertilization. And we're going to go through the steps that we'll talk about. We'll talk about, part of the steps, what happens during double fertilization. Okay? First of all, okay, so after pollination happens, if the right pollen has landed on the right stigma, then you'll have fertilization. Just in case, just in the event that nothing goes wrong between one event and the next. First of all, the pollen grain, okay, which is sitting on the stigma. Okay, I'm getting all excited here. All right, so the pollen grain sitting on the stigma germinates. It actually germinates. It splits open, and then what it does, it sends out something called a pollen tube. Okay, the pollen tube then grows. It's a chemical thing. Okay, because the pistil that it lands on is giving off chemical signals that attracts the pollen tube. So the pollen tube will grow, okay, through the style, all the way through the style, and then into the ovary. Okay. Another thing that will happen is that one sperm will fertilize the egg cell. Okay. Remember the sperm and the egg; these are gametes, right? Male gamete, female gamete. So one sperm will fertilize the egg, and that will give rise to a diploid embryo, because remember, during meiosis, the chromosome numbers have been halved, right? So when the fertilization happens, you have a restoration of the diploid number. So the embryo is like a little baby plant, okay? Little baby plant, okay? The other sperm, because what happens is that the pollen grain and the pollen tube will produce two sperm nuclei, okay? One sperm will fertilize the egg, and that gives rise to the embryo. The other sperm fertilizes these cells called polar nuclei, okay? And that gives us usually a triploid endosperm. So why don't we kind of come and look at the model here, okay? Look at the model here, and then what we'll see is that we see this is the same flower model that we saw a couple of times before. Okay, so when you look at this, okay, look at this close up here. This is the stigma, okay, whether the pollen came from its own anther to its stigma. There's little yellow dots on here showing the pollen. The pollen grain stays up here. The pollen grain stays up here, but it germinates, and then you have mitosis happening. The pollen tubes grow and goes down the style into the ovary, where one sperm nucleus will fuse with the egg cell in here. So it has this long convoluted way to get in there, fertilizing the egg cell. The other polar nuclei will fertilize the other sperm cell will fertilize two cells in there called the polar nuclei. Okay, they should be in here somewhere. So what happens is that that sperm cell fusing with the polar nuclei is going to make endosperm. What is endosperm? Endosperm is what keeps the embryo alive. The embryo, sort of like the placenta of us human beings. You have the baby, in the womb, right? What's happening is that the umbilical cord is connecting the baby with its mom, right? And so the baby is actually taking out, is actually getting nutrients from its mother, right? That makes sense, okay? Alrighty, so that's double fertilization here, okay? Oops, all right. Okay, so another thing too is that, excuse me, the triploid endosperm has been extremely important, because when you think about it, all our grains, wheat, rice, corn, those are the big three of all the grains in the world that support a huge proportion of human nutrition. Bread, rice, corn, tortilla, all the different kind of products that we use. So generally all civilizations, all peoples need a carbohydrate base in our diet. And rice, corn, and wheat is so important because they have all that nutrients. They have this endosperm, okay, this triploid endosperm with a lot of, oftentimes, carbohydrates. Oftentimes it has protein. Oftentimes it also has fats too, depending on the storage product. So the endosperm has been an extremely important source of nutrients for us humans, even though their first and primary function was to help the embryo survive. Yeah? Okay? So after pollination and fertilization, so remember, you have pollination and fertilization as two separate events. Another thing is that we have double fertilization. After fertilization happens, okay, what happens? The plant doesn't need these parts anymore. The sepals, the petals, the stamens are now extraneous. You don't need them anymore. So what they'll usually do is that they'll wither and drop away. And then the ovary, what's left, because even the stigma and the style, not needed anymore. So the ovary will then develop into a fruit. Here we have a market. I think this is in Spain someplace. You have beautiful fruits. You see mangoes and all kinds, papaya, all kinds of stuff. Look at that. Boy, that looks good. Anyway, so of course, fruits too have been very, very important for us. Now, the ovary, after fertilization, becomes a fruit. The ovule, okay, inside of the ovary becomes the seed, okay? Furthermore, and then the embryo then too, okay, the fertilized egg will become an embryo. And then the embryo is actually in the seed. Let me actually show you something, okay? So we're going to go to the Elmo. And do you see that little peanut? I have a little half of a peanut there, okay? If we can zoom closer to it, here. I know it's a roasted peanut, so the plant isn't alive anymore in here. But you see this little thing over here? I think everybody's, you know, when you've eaten peanuts, you know, when you're a kid or when you're an adult, you're playing with your food and you kind of bite the peanut in half and you're eating it. Well, and you might notice that the two halves aren't exactly the same. Well, this little thing here is actually the embryo. So this one is dead, of course, because it's been roasted. It's a roasted peanut, you know. So this part here, it corresponds to the leaves. This part here will correspond to the radicle or the developing root, somewhere around there. It's pretty interesting, huh? So even peanuts, if you get a bean, you get some beans and you soak them. You know, like when you're going to cook beans, you know? You're going to cook beans in the pot, right? Or you can just let them soak. Usually if you're going to be making some beans, like red beans and rice, or you're going to make, you know, vegetarian chili or something, and you're starting off with dried beans, what you usually do is you'll let the beans soak, right, for a while. You'll change the water, you let it soak some more. So after it's absorbed some water, because what you're doing is that it's absorbing some water, making it softer, and then you can actually germinate the beans in some cases. Anyway, if you get the bean and you pry it open, it will actually have a tiny, tiny little embryo in there. And it's alive. It's actually a little baby plant. So very similar to us humans, you know. You have the little embryo in there attached to the placenta. Well, then here, you know, you'll actually have the little baby plant attached to the endosperm. And the endosperm, the reserves in the endosperm eventually go to the cotyledons. Okay, remember cotyledons, right? So if we can go back to the slides, we can kind of see here monocot with a little plumule coming up. Here you have a little dicot. Okay, with its two, you know, seed leaves, cotyledons, yeah? So then that gives rise to the new individual, okay? So it is a miracle. I mean, every time it happens. I know probably everybody in grade school or even in kindergarten or preschool has done this. You know, take a bean seed or corn, put it in a pot, germinate it, and then it's like a miracle. It still is like a miracle, you know? And here we have some seedlings coming up, okay? Seedlings, right? Very good. So all these plants that are a product of sexual reproduction, okay, they're all baby plants, and they all go through the same process, you know, from the parent plant, okay, from the sporophyte to the gametophyte, the alternation of generations, yeah. So then what happens with these seeds? Okay, generally these seeds of flowering plants, they come encased in a fruit. Okay, remember angiosperm means seed in a vessel or seed in a container. Yeah? So the fruits are essential to the sexually reproductive life cycle of flowering plants, for one thing. The fruits protect the seeds, okay? One of the things some fruits will do, they will actually surround the seed and protect it from anything that might eat and destroy the seeds. Because remember, one of the things is that seeds are very nutritious. You know, they have endosperm or they have the cotyledons, a lot of food reserves in there. Okay, so you have a lot of carbohydrates, you have proteins, you might even have, let's see, lipids in there too. Yeah, so when you think about it, sunflower seed oil, safflower seed oil, you know, a lot of those oils actually come from seeds, okay? So it's very important to protect the seed from anything that might eat them, because the plant can't continue its life cycle if, you know, if the seeds are not allowed to live, and etc. Okay? Now, another function of the fruit is that it helps to disperse the seeds. So here, this is a squash with a flower, a developing squash fruit. See, this is the ovary developing into a fruit. It's been pollinated, and here, this is a cutaway of the rest of the flower. Okay, so it's a whole process. So you cannot have a fruit without a flower. Okay, you cannot have a fruit without a flower. Okay, and you generally you need to have a flower to produce a fruit. Now the thing about fruits is that because they're nutritious, and say for example, they're also widely used for fruits. This is another example of coevolution, because we mammals and other animals have actually co-evolved with these flowering plants. Okay, and what happens? Okay, so these fruits are used for food. So one of the things is, did you know that the grains, corn, wheat, and rice, they're not actually seeds. They're fruits. Okay, they're a kind of fruit known as grains. Because what is a grain? A grain is a dry fruit, okay, that the seed, you cannot dissect the seed apart from the fruit, because they're actually stuck to each other and they actually make up, you know, part of the same structure. So a seed that you cannot dissect from a fruit, and if it's a dry fruit, it's called a grain, okay? And of course, here you have bread, here you have flours, you have wheat over here in this corner here. This looks like oats, okay? And here you have, looks like oatmeal raisin cookies, you know, which almost everybody loves or likes, you know? Oats, did you know too, in terms of history, Romans fed their horses oats. Even when the Roman legions, even when they were out fighting and conquering people and all the things that they used to do, when they ran short of rations, they refused to eat oats because they thought that was animal food. Okay, now we know that oats are really actually very good for you. Okay, especially when you have. Okay, so now we're getting into some definitions here. Okay, so these are vegetables. Most people would agree that these are vegetables. Yeah, this looks like a radish. Without the little piece, this looks like a radish, and this is broccoli. So radish, this part here that we eat, this is a root. Remember, it's a swollen storage root of the radish plant, yeah? And some people don't know that these broccoli are actually buds. These are florets, broccoli florets. Okay, so these are little buds, but they're not really flowers yet. Okay, they're not bloomed yet, right? Then we also have fruits. Most people would agree that apricots are fruits. I think these are apricots. And pears are fruits, okay? Think about that. These are vegetables and these are fruits. Now what if you have another case? Now a tomato, okay, a tomato. Is it a vegetable or is it a fruit? Could it be a vegetable? Could it be a fruit? Can it be both? Can it be neither? All right. Anyway, so what is, okay, just think about it. So I won't answer the question just now, but think about it, okay? What makes a fruit a fruit? What makes a vegetable a vegetable? Okay, define your terms, all right? Okay, so fruit and vegetable, how can you tell them apart? Okay, I guess, shall we answer the question? I think you guys probably got it, yeah? Well, fruit is something, it's a structure that develops from a flower, okay? Fruits generally also have seeds, okay? Vegetables, or at least botanically, vegetables, okay, vegetables generally develop from a root or a stem or a leaf or part of those parts, okay? So that tomato there, you know, and that we're looking at, that actually is a wonderful illustration because it actually gives you, you know, it actually gives you a little bit, okay, of a kind of thing to work from. So here we have, right, because legally, amazingly, it actually went to court. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court. I guess this fellow, you know, didn't want to pay something, no, something like they were wanting him to tax him for this as a fruit, I guess. I'm not sure, maybe. I'm getting it confused. Anyway, so it went up to the Supreme Court, and what they decided is that even though botanically a tomato is a fruit, because it has seeds, because a tomato develops from a flower, botanically it's a fruit, but legally it's a vegetable. It's a vegetable. The Supreme Court, in all its wisdom, had decided that generally fruits are things that you associate with desserts. Fruits are things that are sweet. Okay, so things, and even something like rhubarb. Rhubarb is actually a petiole, I believe, or a stem. Rhubarb, I think, rhubarb pie, right? Rhubarb is actually a stem, I believe, yeah? And I think the stem is actually the only part of it that is actually edible. The rest of it is poisonous, so it can make you sick, I think, yeah? But rhubarb pie, it's a little bit tart, a little bit sweet, it's very tasty, but they decided that rhubarb is considered a fruit. But it does not develop from a flower, okay? It also, it also, I guess, isn't sweet, I guess, unless you add sugar to it, but they consider rhubarb a fruit. So isn't that kind of strange? Anyway, but, I'm not going to argue with the Supreme Court, that's for sure. All right, so we find out, how can you tell the difference between a fruit or a vegetable? Botanically. So if I ask you a question, it's going to have to do with botanically, okay, what it is, whether it's a fruit or a vegetable. Okay? In fact, sometimes we can even do something called supermarket botany. What I'd do is I'd give people a list to look for these different organs, in the supermarket, and then they have to find it. Usually you find a lot of it in the produce section. Like I'll say, fruits, find me a pome, find me a hesperidium, find me a berry. Okay, and they have to be able to find botanically what these are. Okay? All right, so getting back to the slides here. Okay, what would you think these beans are, fruit or vegetable? Okay, I'm not going to answer these questions. You guys have to think on your own. Okay, just remember. Okay, generally a fruit has seeds. Okay, fruits have developed from flowers. Right? How about an eggplant or an aubergine? Aubergine, I think they call it. Yeah, in France. And I think they call the color this kind of purplish, dark purplish, dull purplish color. They used to call it aubergine. Yeah, eggplant. Yeah. Did you know eggplant is also from the Americas? This look like beets. Okay, what are beets? Are beets fruits or are they vegetables? And what about peppers? You can see those seeds in there. Look at them seeds. This, I think, is a jalapeno pepper. Very nice photograph. Spinach. What is spinach? It is a flowering plant, but what is the part we eat? What is the part we eat? Is it a fruit or is it a vegetable? And what part of it do we eat? What part of this plant do we usually eat? And we have cucumber. Cucumber, look at that, nice slices of cucumber, right? Very, very good when you make like cucumber kimchi, is really delicious. When you make a pickled cucumber, I guess that's nice too. And tomatoes, aren't they beautiful? Makes you want to get a vegetable garden, My father has a vegetable garden. He seems to enjoy that. And here we have some cabbage. Okay, is it a fruit? Is it a vegetable? Okay, now we're going to get into fruit types. Okay, so just think about those pictures. Okay, think about those pictures. See if you can figure whether it's a fruit or a vegetable. Okay, all right, now we're going to get into fruit types. And one type is called fleshy fruits. Okay, fleshy fruits. Fleshy fruits have water in them. They're like juicy, when you eat them. So they have like a body to them. They have flesh on them, and oftentimes we eat them. So that it actually appeals to our part in our animal nature too. Think about for the fruits. These juicy, fleshy fruits, they actually evolved for something to eat them and then disperse their seeds, right? When like you were a kid and maybe you had to walk home from school, okay? And it's already May, it's May and getting into June, and school's going to be out in a couple of weeks. You're walking over and it's hot, and you're carrying your book bag, or you're carrying your bag or your backpack, or with all your books in it, it's hot, What happens? You're walking at this corner house, maybe 2 blocks from your home, has tangerines on it, What do you want to do? You want to pick it and you want to eat it. Even if you don't do that, this is your impulse. Well, that's because we're animals, And these fruits have evolved their kind of structure. They're kind of like, wow, look at this food, So they developed the coloration, the oranges, the yellows, the reds, to attract our eye or another animal's eye, so that we'll get the fruit and eat it, then disperse the seeds. So these fruits, even the ones that we cultivate nowadays, they're actually descended from plants that made fruits that utilize mammals and utilize other animals to spread their seeds. Because it makes sense. If you have a parent plant, the fruit just drops to the ground, you have the baby plants coming up, well, the parent plant is overshading the baby plants, So for some plants, if you eat the fruit, you take and you wander away, you drop the seed someplace else, well, maybe it will have a better chance for it to survive there out of the shade of its parent. Isn't that interesting? Okay. Now, of course, we have all these different kind of categories of fruits. Okay. Believe it or not, a banana is a berry. You might think, oh, bananas don't have seeds, but they do. They actually are kind of fruits that are called parthenogenic. Okay. Parthenogenic fruits. What is parthenogenic? What does that mean? Do you know? Well, parthenogenic means, I guess, Athena, the goddess Athena, Greek goddess Athena. I think one of her manifestations was Pallas Athena. Anyway, so she had a big, still there, a huge building in Athens, which was named after her, called the Parthenon. Okay, and so what it refers to, Athena was a virgin goddess. Okay, she was a virgin goddess. So what fruits that develop this way are called parthenocarpic, because the flowers, banana do make flowers. Okay, in fact, I heard a quotation that somebody described Ka'ahumanu having skin, the texture and the sweetness and the color of banana flowers. Okay, anyway, so bananas are parthenogenic. What they usually do is they'll give them a whiff of ethylene or some other plant hormone. What that does, it promotes fruits. It actually promotes the forming of fruits without fertilization. And not just that, is that the banana actually does have little ovules in it. All those little black things in there, those are actually unfertilized ovules. You can eat them, that's fine. And in fact, if you go out and go hiking and you find like a little banana plant with banana fruits in it, and you eat and you peel it and you expect to eat it, well, it's loaded with seeds in there. Wild bananas have seeds. Anyway, so there are some fruits that you can actually induce parthenocarpy in it, where it can actually produce fruits without pollination, without fertilization. Isn't that amazing? You just have to give them a hormone. And there are also hormones that you can actually give the plants whiffs of these hormones, and they'll all flower. Okay, they'll actually do that due to the presence of hormones. We're going to get into that a little bit later, so don't worry about that for now. I just thought it's very interesting that bananas don't really have seeds, and they're actually the result of parthenocarpy. Okay, sort of like a virgin conception, which didn't actually happen. I mean, not in people. I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about fruits. Isn't that interesting? Okay, a berry is a thin-skinned fruit that has a few too many seeds. Okay, okay. Secondly, we have another kind of fruit. Okay, so think about what can be berries. We have tomatoes, right? We have peppers. Okay, we have kiwi fruits, papayas. Yeah. Okay, so next we have the Hesperidiums, all right? Hesperidiums are the citrus fruits. They're like a citrus, they're like a berry in that they're like a berry except that they have a rind, the skin around like a lemon. So here, this is lime and this is lemon and limes and oranges and grapefruits, pomelos and tangerines, a whole bunch of like that. They have this leathery rind that has these aromatic oils. Okay, and also the interior of the fruit is segmented. I guess each of these segments correspond to a carpel. Remember, a carpel is a subunit within a pistil. Yeah? So remember that this fruit actually developed from a single pistil. Okay? So if you're a woman and if you've had babies, I know it's very, oh boy, in the last month or two, it's very cumbersome. You feel very clumsy and all that kind of stuff. But you should see, you actually have fruits that develop that end up to be like 8 inches long, developing from a flower that's maybe about 1/4 of an inch big. That's amazing. Okay, now, so Hesperidiums are the citrus fruits. Okay, they have a leathery rind around them with aromatic oils, and they have the inside parts of the fruit segmented into pieces. Now we have the peepo, P-E-P-O. They're a berry type of fruit. Okay, they are a berry, but they're a special type of berry. They have a thick rind. Okay, that's one thing. So this cantaloupe, of course, is peepo. What do you call squashes, cucumbers? Pumpkins are peepos, also P-E-P-O. Okay, so think about that. So of course, squashes, okay, are fruits. right? We also have drupes, okay? We have drupes. I guess we don't have to show this since we have a nice one here. Drupes generally have the seed being single, just one single seed, okay, with a very hard, stony outside of the seed. Okay, so it has one seed. So think about that. Okay, so we can have what? Peaches. And we have olives. Olive, of course, is a fruit. It develops from a flower. It has a seed inside. It has a single pit. Cherries, mangoes, lychee. Yeah, think about that. Those are all different kinds of drupes. Okay. Okay, so why don't we do a little quick going over again. So a berry, okay, include, I'll just give you like a list of things and you can kind of think about the terms, because remember, it's a concept that is the most important, okay? So berries, what do they include? They include kiwi fruits, papayas, star fruits, okay? Let's see, what else that we might be familiar with, all right? So the thing is that's really tricky is that things like a strawberry, things like a mulberry, things like a blackberry, okay, is not a berry. Okay, they're actually different kinds of fruits. Okay, so berries, thin-skinned fruits with a few to many seeds. Did you know, what would you think an avocado is? That's not a fair question. Because the thing is, avocado has only one seed, but the seed is not hard and stone-like. So an avocado is a single-seeded berry. So it gets kind of complicated, okay? But don't worry, I'm not going to give you any kind of fruit as examples. It's going to be ambiguous. Okay, I'm not going to do that. That wouldn't be fair. Hesperidiums, okay, citrus fruits, peepals, things like pumpkins, gourds. Okay, they're a type of berry, but they have a thick rind, right? More berries tend to be more thin skin on them. Drupes, thin-skinned fruits with one single hard seed. Okay, cherries, mangoes, okay, anything with like a pit in it, okay? Another kind of fleshy fruit are the palm fruits, because you might be thinking, what about apples? Why are apples, why are apples palm fruits, and why wouldn't they be considered, let's see, I think we'll see it later, but why don't we cut this here? Okay, so these are called palm fruits, and do you know why? Okay, if we go to, let's see. If we go to the Elmo, we have a little cut apple here, okay? I just cut this in half longitudinally, all right? Now the thing too is that we don't call this a berry because generally berries and some of the others we were talking about, they're actually a ripened ovary. That's what those fruits are. Now when you look at this apple here, this part here is a part that we eat, okay? This part here is actually the ovary. So we don't actually eat usually because this is the parts where the seeds are, right? It has this thin skin over here. So this part has actually developed from tissue other than the ovary. That has actually developed from tissue which we can call receptacle tissue. Let's see. Alrighty, we don't really have that here, but if we look at this flower, okay, it's not quite the same thing, but if we look at this flower, okay, here. Now this part, of course, is the sepals. All right, this part is something, I think it's called an involucre, don't worry about this. But down here, this is an area which could be called the receptacle of this flower. Well, in apples and in pears and in crab apples, if we can go back to the slides, okay, that these all have the fleshy part that we eat have developed from receptacle tissue. So it just has to do with what part we eat develops from. That's why they call them pome fruits, okay, P-O-M-E. You just have to remember pome fruits, apples, and pears, okay? We also have aggregate fruits, and there, of course, there we have a raspberry on the right, there we have a strawberry on the left, and these are not berries. I know it's confusing, but if I explain, maybe it'll be easier, okay? Now this strawberry is actually in the same family as the apple we just looked at. It's in the rose family. You see every one of these little things that some people think are the seeds? These are actually fruits. This little thing here is a fruit. This one here is a fruit. This one here is a fruit. These are dry fruits called achenes, okay? And the part that we like to eat on the strawberry, this is all receptacle tissue, okay? So that makes it what they call an aggregate fruit in a way. They would call it an accessory fruit, I guess. But we also have aggregate fruits such as this. You would think that, whoa, wow. You'd say a raspberry, okay, is actually, has a lot of seeds in it. Why is that? Well, one of the things you can see, each of these structures here is actually the result of one pistil. You can actually see the stigma and the style sticking out, these little hairs sticking out. So every one of these is actually a pistil, an ovary, and they fuse together to form an aggregate fruit. Because what it is, you have an aggregation of separate ovaries, but all of these ovaries would have been in a single flower. Okay, this fruit developed from one flower, but many pistils. Okay, so that's what makes an aggregate fruit. You have an aggregate of pistils. Okay. Now we have another kind of fruit known as a multiple fruit. Okay, let's see. Let me see. There it is. Alrighty. So what a multiple fruit develops from multiple flowers. Okay. So if we look on the elmo, okay, we have here noni. Excuse me, noni, Morinda citrifolia. Okay, and you can see that each of these little buds are actually going to develop into a flower. Okay, so here you have flowers, and here we have here a fruit, okay, of the noni. And the noni, every one of these parts here came from an individual flower. So a multiple fruit, okay, a multiple fruit like noni develops from an inflorescence. It actually develops from multiple flowers. That's how you can remember. Okay, multiple fruit, multiple flowers. Okay, so noni, very, very evident in Hawaii. Okay, so here on the slides, here you can see this is a fig. Okay, I thought I brought a fig. There it is. Okay, so we'll take a look at that in a second. That's a little bit different. I mean, it's the same thing. It is a multiple fruit. Okay, and here we have, I think, a jackfruit. And I think some people claim that the jackfruit might be the biggest fruit, but I'm not sure if that's true. Yeah. Anyway, but it is a big fruit, and it's pretty good. It's kind of like sour tasting a little bit, if I remember correctly. It's the same thing as soursop, I believe. Yeah. Anyway, looking at a fig, okay. Yes. And so what we're going to get this thing, we're going to cut it open a little bit. Oops, not ripe. But here, inside here, you see that this is 2 halves of a fig. If we go closer, you can see the things inside there. This is unripe fruit. So here, these are actually lots and lots of little flowers. You're thinking, well, the flowers are turned inward. How do they get pollinated? Okay, generally a fig. Okay, if we zoom out and you look at, there's a little hole here where the pollinator can actually enter into there, run around in there, lay its eggs and everything like that, and then die in there. So this too is a multiple fruit because it develops from multiple flowers. Figs are multiple fruit. Yeah. So they're really good fruits too, So it sort of makes you hungry. You got to look at all these great fruits. Okay. Okay, now we're going to get into the dry fruits. All right. So dry fruits are dry when they're ripe. Dry fruits mean they're not fleshy. They don't have a lot of water in them. Okay. So dry fruits are dry. So if we can go to the slides, yes. And you can divide them into 2 types. You have dehiscent dry fruits, okay? That just means that the fruit splits open, okay, when it's ripe. And we have one type is called a follicle, okay? A follicle, so this is a magnolia fruits, and each of these things are actually a follicle, okay? Each of these things splitting open. So a follicle splits open along one seam. It only splits open along one side, okay? It's a dry fruit. Magnolia, and here these are fruits of Banksia, which is a relative of the proteas. Okay, so here we have each follicle, so you can see it only has one split. Okay, and we also have what do you call it? I think this is milkweed. Okay, and we don't see it split open here, but this does split open this way. Okay, and it just opens along one seam. And other kind of dry fruits, okay, also include the legumes. All right. A lot of legumes, a lot of the members of the Fabaceae or the legume family, the bean family, are like that. These are peanuts. Peanuts are interesting, of course, because people call them groundnuts too, because they'll actually flower and they'll fruit underground. Okay, so peanuts is a legume. Now these are peas. okay, pea fruits. And these also are, so one way you can tell a legume is that when you actually open them up, when you crack open the fruit or you open them when they're dry, they will split along two seams. Okay, so follicles split along one seam, legumes split along two seams. And this is soy. Okay, soy, the soy plant, the same one that you make soyu out of, you know, or soy sauce or shoyu. Yeah. So, and what else do they make out of this? Tofu, a whole lot of things, you know. They say that soy actually is a phytoestrogen contributor. So sometimes when you go to the supermarkets, you'll see a lot of little old ladies at the supermarkets buying tofu, buying that edamame, you know, that soybean, that frozen soybeans, you know, that you can buy, because not only it has these phytoestrogens, but there's also supposed to be anti-carcinogenic, supposed to help prevent people from getting cancer. Soy. Okay. Okay, now another kind of dry fruit is a capsule. Now this is opium poppy, Papaver somniferum, and this is actually a green fruit of the poppy. Okay, so a beautiful flower, you know, beautiful flower. And I know for the opium, to get opium, you know, they will score the green fruit, and then a milky white latex drips out of that, and the people come and they collect it, score it some more, and what they'll do is that they'll make it into a wad, sort of like a brownish color wad, and then with that, the people, for pain-killing purposes, they would smoke it and thing. And the opium poppy played a big role in the history of China, you know. Some people say, or some historians will say that English people actually deliberately addicted a lot of Chinese people to opium so they could get access to the markets in China, you know, because of course, with 1/4 of the world's population, you know, that's amazing. Anyways, that's kind of like a shameful part in human history. Anyway, so here, you know, drug addiction is not good. It really isn't. It can destroy lives. Anyway, so here we have Spathoglottis plicata. It's an orchid, and here you can see that the flower, and then after it has been pollinated and fertilized, here you can see the flower dies, and then the fruit develops. And orchids usually have capsules for fruits. Okay, capsules generally split open along 3 or more seams. Follicle splits along one seam when it's ready to dehisce and let go of its seeds. Legumes split along 2 seams, and capsules split along 3 seams or more. And guess what this is? This is so neat. Okay, this is vanilla, amazingly. Okay, this is vanilla. So vanilla, real vanilla, comes from the capsule of a vanilla orchid, which is a vine form of plants. Okay. Now the kind of indehiscent fruits, of course, are the grains that you need to know about. Those are the main ones, yeah, that probably you'll get in contact with. So corn, of course, is a grain. Remember what grains are? It's when you can't actually tease apart the embryo from the endosperm. They're fused together, okay? Or you can't actually, I'm sorry, I think I got that wrong. You can't actually tease apart the seed from the fruit. Okay, so wheat is also a grain. Okay, so you can see the wheat grains here. It's a fruit, okay? And here you have rice, right? Alrighty, and another kind of indehiscent fruit is a nut. Okay, so here's our chestnuts. They usually have a hard art part, okay, and then walnuts too. Okay, so those are the 2 kind of dry fruits. Usually I have people just know about the grains, but I guess in this one I want you folks to know about the nuts too. It's always important to know about nuts, you know? Okay, next we're going to get into apples and oranges, all right? You see beautiful apple blossoms over there on the right, and here you have orange blossoms, oftentimes associated with weddings on the left, because I guess orange blossoms tend to bloom, and you have orange fruits. Real pretty. This is perfect, picture pretty kind of photograph here. Alrighty, again, and here we have apple. Okay, apple, the scientific name is Malus primula, and it's in the plant family, the Rosaceae. Okay, and here you can see the longitudinal section cut up and down. Here's a cross section, okay, cross side to side. Okay, so this is a good botanical illustration, okay, showing apple. And now the apple is a palm fruit, as we just went over. It's also native to Western Asia, okay, Central and Western Asia. I like this photograph because this is actually a beautiful apple, but this is a wild apple, harvested in the area that we call the Middle East, that is actually more properly known as Western Asia. But this is a wild apple. Look how beautiful it is. Doesn't it make you want to eat it, you know? Yes? So apple, another thing, another noteworthy thing about it is that when people are cultivating it and growing apple, they don't grow it from seed, because apple is kind of funny in this way, in that it doesn't breed true. You can breed, cross-pollinate one really good apple plant with another good apple plant that gives really, really good fruits, and then all their offspring seeds will have all the way from terrible all the way to unknown. Anthuriums are like that too. They do not breed true. That when you cross two parents, you're not necessarily going to get anything resembling either parent or both parents. Okay, so usually people graft apples. So this is a good graft. Usually when the plant is the twig is kind of small, this part here, you see this V cut here. This is like a V cut they use in the stalk plant. Okay, you have a scion, okay, and a stalk. Okay, let's go back to that. So this part here is a stalk. That's the one that has good, hardy rootstock, very healthy. And the scion is a plant that maybe is more delicate, but you can do this in vegetative propagation. So they'll take twig cuttings or stem cuttings, cut them this way, notch the stalk, and then put them together, and then they'll take. So their apple varieties are usually grafted. Did you know that the red delicious apples, a lot of apples that are very much, desirable, they were found as volunteers in places, because there was a guy named Johnny Appleseed and etc. Okay, anyway, scion and stalk. Okay, now another thing about apples is that, you can see they come in various colors. About half of the apple crop is eaten fresh. The rest of it is usually used for making other products, such as apple sauce that you see there, apple butter. Apple butter is sort of like a spread that you can use where the applesauce loses some water. You have apple juices. Here you have raw apple juice, and you have another regular filtered apple juice, unfiltered and filtered apple juice, and then you have apple cider. Now, apple cider is like, what we call apple cider is actually like an apple juice. Apple cider is actually the hard cider, okay? Hard cider is actually alcoholic. And in fact, in the olden days, like on the east part of the United States, what became the United States, all those people that lived over there, even the kids, they usually drank hard cider. Okay, why is that? Because generally hard cider that has alcohol in it, you could drink it pretty safely without being able to get sick. You don't get sick necessarily when you drink alcohol. I mean, in moderation, And in fact, in Europe now, and in the Roman times too, people drink wine. Even little kids drink wine. Adolescents drink wine. This is just part of their lifestyle. Another thing too is, I think in the old Roman days, everybody drank wine, but usually the wine, you would have half wine and half water. When you think about it, the wine was actually there to help get the water clean, because the water in all these places were really dirty, And my own thought is that maybe, unfortunately, we have a lot of young people in the United States that do this binge drinking, which is very bad. Very bad. I think it's just because alcohol is prohibited to anybody under a certain age, and I think that creates, this thing like this whole youth culture thing about, getting very drunk, and I don't think it's a healthy thing. I think it would just be healthier if people were just, beer is fine, you just watch out so the child doesn't become an alcoholic, but I think it's probably part of our Puritan heritage, which still has an impact on our culture. Anyway, but just to know, in other places, in other cultures around the world, children drink wine. Maybe not, the whole undiluted, but, that's just part of their culture. That's just part of everyday eating and drinking. Anyway, so we also have oranges. Okay, oranges, Citrus sinensis, okay, and it's in the family Rutaceae. Okay, that's a very nice picture of oranges. Okay, it's a Hesperidium fruit. Remember Hesperidium? It's going to be important for you guys to know all this. It's native to China, or probably East Asia, yeah? Also not grown from seeds. Citruses also do not breed true. You can cross a really, really good variety with a really, really good variety and come up with something that's not even very worth growing, okay? So these two are generally grafted. And you can eat it fresh, okay? These are two interesting things, because this is something that they call the blood orange, okay? They call it blood orange because it's this really dark red color. It's supposed to be pretty good. I've never eaten a blood orange, It does look sort of like meat, doesn't it? But I think it's, it's something that you can eat, and I think it's good. Usually if you eat a fruit or a vegetable that has a lot of blue, purple, red, orange, yellow, really intensely colored fruits, that usually has a very high proportion of flavonoids, and these are antioxidants. Remember we talked about that oxidation is probably what causes cell aging and cell death, okay? So eat a lot of fruits, eat a lot of colorful fruits, that's good for you. blueberries, blackberries, cranberries, you know, all that kind of stuff. So that was just a blood orange, you know. Now here, this is a navel orange, and did you know that these navel orange, okay, this part here is actually its twin. Okay, this is like an identical twin that didn't develop. Interesting, huh? This is actually a separate orange, but the part that forms a navel, that's actually a separate individual, but somehow they developed. This actually came up as a sport. It was actually some kind of mutation that just popped up somewhere and it gave really good oranges, you know. This also made me think of another story, but I don't think we have time for that right now. That's okay. And if you don't eat the oranges fresh, you can make marmalade, yes, similar to apple butter. You can make orange juice, just like apple juice. And of course, you can make a liqueur like curacao, right? So it's a liqueur, I think it's sweet tasting, yeah, made from the bitter orange. Okay, so we compared apples and oranges. All right, now we're just going to do a quick survey of tropical and subtropical fruits just to remind people about stuff that's available in the market. We're just going to look at some things that most of us are familiar with. Okay, mangoes, of course. Hawaii very famous for their mangoes, especially Hayden mangoes. But you know, I heard that there is a variety that they're growing now. Like a lot of them are still maybe a few years from flowering for the first time, but it's supposed to be better than Hayden, even better than Hayden. It's like a hybrid between Hayden and another really, really good variety. So here's this lady kind of at a roadside stand selling mangoes, and don't they look delicious? Mango season is summertime in Hawaii, I think. We also have lychee. Don't you like lychee? Look at that. And what kind of fruit is a lychee? What kind of fruit is a mango? Think about it. I've heard people from other places who aren't familiar with lychee. They say they don't like to eat it because it looks like an eye. But of course, lychee is one of the best. You know, go to Dave's Ice Cream and order their lychee sherbet. You know, that's the best. I like that even better than coffee ice cream or chocolate ice cream. Anyway, and here we have mountain apple, also known as ohia-ai. Syzygia malicense, yeah, malicense. And here are the flowers. Yeah, we do still have mountain apple trees on Oahu, but we don't seem to get them so much anymore. We used to have aunties in my family that used to give us mangoes and lychees and mountain apples and like that. And so here's a close-up of the flowers with all the anthers sticking out. These are complete flowers though, you know, complete and perfect. Okay, and here's the actual fruits. So delicious, you know, so refreshing. There's a lot of water in there. It's only semi-sweet, but it's very delicious on a hot day if you're out hiking up in the mountains or something. Okay, there's banana, of course, also known as mai'a. Okay, an example of parthenogenic fruit. Okay, and some tropical American fruits that we're familiar with. Papaya is actually from the Americas. Okay, what kind of fruit is it? Yeah, it's actually a berry. Right. Okay. Okay. Pineapple. What kind of fruit do you think it is? Okay. If we actually go to the Elmo, okay, I have this fruit, like a little sacrifice. Now, did you know that, anyway, each of these segments here actually correspond to a flower. Okay, so this is actually what kind of fruit? It's a multiple fruit. Yeah? Multiple fruit is a fruit that develops from multiple flowers. Okay, we also have avocado, another subtropical fruit that we're pretty much familiar with, Persea. Yeah, right now is avocado season as well. Even if we humans don't eat the fruits, I think the birds like it too. Guava, something that we see in Hawaii all the time from tropical America. You can make juice from it. You can eat it as it is. It's also good if you have running stomach. It helps to bind you up a little bit. The little first 2 or 3 leaves at the top of a twig, you chew that and swallow it, it'll stop diarrhea, you know. Passion fruit, okay. Some people call it lilikoi, yeah. So this is something I remember eating. It's very delicious. It's tart sweet. You know, if you like tart, sweet kind of fruits, it's wonderful. It's kind of slimy, though. You have to get used to it, I guess. Okay, now we're coming down to the summary here. Okay, so we've gotten to look at a lot of fruits. We also looked at pollination and pollinators. Okay, we also went through the double fertilization, where one sperm fertilizes the egg, the other sperm fertilizes the polar nuclei. We also found out that fruits are good to eat. Yes, for sure. Good for the plant and also good for us if we can spread their seeds. Okay, and also fruits have seeds. Furthermore, we went through fleshy fruits and the different types. We went through the dry fruit and different types. And we can compare apples and oranges. And we also went through tropical and subtropical fruits. Okay, that's all we have for today. Next time, we'll see you, okay? And hopefully you guys enjoyed this. This is a really fun one, I think, yes? And it's kind of making me hungry. Okay, so we'll see you next time. Aloha.